I still don't know what made me look. Maybe it was the way Olivia hesitated for just a second too long before she answered me. Maybe it was the way her fingers twitched as she tucked her hair behind her ear, a habit she had when she was nervous. Or maybe it was nothing at all, just a feeling that had been growing in the back of my mind for weeks, nagging at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. But in that moment, standing in our kitchen with the smell of fresh coffee in the air and the morning sun spilling through the windows, I knew something was wrong. It started with a trip, an out-of-town medical conference she was attending with a few of her coworkers. This wasn't unusual. She went to at least 2 or 3 of these a year, always coming back exhausted but full of stories about new medical techniques, difficult cases, and how she hated networking with arrogant surgeons who thought they were gods. I never once questioned it. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was because she hadn't told me about it until the night before she was supposed to leave, casually dropping it into conversation like it was an afterthought. Or maybe it was the fact that she had been distant for the past month, brushing off my attempts to talk, to connect, to be close to her the way we used to be. "Where is it this time?" I had asked, pretending not to notice how she was avoiding my eyes. "Chicago," she said too quickly, turning her back to me as she rummaged through the fridge for something. "Same hotel as last year." I nodded, but something about her answer felt off. I couldn't explain why. That night, I helped her pack, something I always did when she traveled. I handed her folded clothes, double-checked her charger, even slipped a few of her favorite snacks into the front pocket of her suitcase like I always did. But this time, I paid closer attention. I noticed how she packed a new dress I had never seen before, something more suited for a night out than a medical conference. I noticed how she hesitated before tossing in her usual scrubs and work shoes, almost like they were an afterthought. And I noticed how she kept checking her phone, not replying to anything, just looking. I didn't say anything. Not yet. The next morning, I drove her to the airport. She kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, and disappeared through the security checkpoint without looking back. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Something was wrong. I should have left it alone. I should have trusted her. But when I got home, alone in the house, that itch in my brain wouldn't go away. So I did something I had never done in our 12 years of marriage. I went into her closet. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to ease the feeling of unease gnawing at me. But then I noticed something strange. The bag she always took with her on trips, the one she used every single time she traveled, was still there, sitting neatly on the shelf like she had never touched it. My pulse picked up. I turned to the dresser and pulled open the top drawer where she kept her jewelry. The necklace I had bought her for our anniversary last year was missing. She never wore it unless it was a special occasion. That was when I knew. I spent the next few hours pacing the house, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. Why had she lied about taking her usual bag? Why had she packed a dress I had never seen before? Why did she hesitate when I asked about the trip? I needed answers. I called the hospital, casually asking the receptionist if Olivia had checked in for the conference. The woman on the other end hesitated, then told me Olivia wasn't on the list of registered attendees. My stomach dropped. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. That was when the panic set in. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I drove to the airport. It was stupid. I had no plan, no idea what I was looking for. But my gut told me she wasn't in Chicago, and I needed to know where she had really gone. I parked in the lot, walked into the terminal, and stood near the airline counters, scanning the departures board. If she had really gone to Chicago, her flight would have left hours ago. But I wasn't looking for flights to Chicago. I was looking for anything else. And then I saw it. A direct flight to Miami. Departed 2 hours ago. I don't know how I knew, but I did. My wife wasn't in Chicago. She was in Miami. For the first time in my life, I felt something break inside me. I turned around and walked back to my car in a daze. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, my mind racing. Who was she with? How long had this been going on? And why would she do this to me? I clenched my jaw, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I wasn't going to sit here and let this happen. I was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. And then I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could lie to me. The drive home felt like it lasted forever, my thoughts running in circles, trying to piece together the puzzle of my wife's deception. I replayed every conversation we had in the past few weeks, every odd moment, every detail that hadn't seemed important at the time. It was as if my brain was digging through old memories, trying to find the moment when everything started to fall apart, But the harder I tried to pinpoint it, the more I realized that I had been blind for too long. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at our house, the place where we had built a life together, the place where I had trusted her without question. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just numb, as if my body hadn't fully processed the betrayal. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether I should try calling her again, but I already knew it would go straight to voicemail, just like before. I wasn't going to get the answers I needed from her, not yet. Instead, I went inside and headed straight for my office, pulling my laptop out of my bag and setting it on the desk. If she had lied about where she was going, then she had to have left a trail somewhere, something that would tell me the truth. I started with the airline's website, entering her name into the reservation system. As expected, there was no record of her booking a flight to Chicago. But when I tried Miami, there it was, a first-class ticket purchased 2 weeks ago. My hands tightened into fists. 2 weeks. She had been planning this while still pretending everything was normal between us, lying to my face every single day. That was the moment when the anger started creeping in, slow and steady, burning in the pit of my stomach. I leaned back in my chair, breathing heavily, trying to control the storm building inside me. I needed more. I needed to know who she was with. I opened our shared bank account, scrolling through the recent transactions. A hotel charge stood out immediately, the Fontainebleau Miami Beach, a luxury resort that cost more per night than we usually spent on a full weekend getaway. It had been booked for 3 nights. That was more than just a work trip excuse. That was a vacation, a planned escape, something she had been looking forward to while lying next to me in bed. My hands trembled as I clicked on the charge, trying to find any details I could. I grabbed my phone and called the hotel. When the receptionist answered, I forced myself to sound calm. "Hi, I just wanted to confirm a reservation. My wife, Olivia Carter, checked in earlier today." There was a pause, just long enough to make me nervous before the receptionist responded. "Yes, she did check in this afternoon." I swallowed hard, forcing the next words out. "Was it a single or double room?" Another pause. "It's a suite, sir." The back of my neck burned. A suite. For 2 people. I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of my desk to keep my hands from shaking. "And was there anyone else on the reservation?" "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose that information." I hung up without another word. I didn't need them to tell me. I already knew. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the reality of it settling into my bones. My wife had flown to Miami with someone else, booked a suite at a luxury hotel, and was currently living a life I had no part in. She wasn't stuck in a boring conference room listening to medical lectures. She was drinking expensive cocktails by the pool, sleeping in silk sheets, and pretending that her real life, our life, didn't exist. The anger grew, solidifying into something sharper, something that made my hands steady instead of shaking. If she thought she could just walk back through our front door in 3 days and pretend everything was fine, she was wrong. If she thought she could lie to me and never face the consequences, she was wrong. If she thought she could live 2 lives without me finding out, she was about to learn just how badly she had miscalculated. I wasn't going to wait for her to come home with excuses. I wasn't going to sit here in silence, pretending to be clueless. If she wanted to act like our marriage didn't exist for a few days, then I was going to make sure she came home to something she never expected. And it was going to be hard. I wasn't going to sit in my house waiting for her to come back and lie to me with a smile on her face like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to let her walk through the door, kiss me on the cheek, and tell me she was exhausted from all the networking she had to do at her fake conference. She had gone to Miami with someone, and I needed to know exactly who it was. I had the hotel, I had her flight details, and now I needed to see it for myself. I wasn't going to let her hide behind excuses when I confronted her. I needed undeniable proof, something that would destroy any pathetic attempt at justifying what she was doing. I packed a bag, booked a last-minute flight, and drove straight to the airport without a second thought. If she was enjoying herself in Miami, she wouldn't be expecting me to show up unannounced, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The flight felt like the longest few hours of my life. I barely looked at the people around me, barely noticed the flight attendants asking if I wanted something to drink. My thoughts were consumed with what I was about to walk into. The moment the plane landed, I switched my phone off airplane mode and checked the time. She had been in Miami for nearly 8 hours now, enough time to check into the hotel, get comfortable, and fall deeper into whatever fantasy she was living. I wasn't going to call her or text her. I wanted her to keep believing she had fooled me. I grabbed my bag, walked out of the airport, and hailed a cab straight to the Fontainebleau. When I arrived, I didn't rush inside. I stood across the street for a few minutes, watching the entrance, looking at the people walking in and out, wondering if I would see her step out of the doors with someone. The place was exactly what I had expected. Expensive, glamorous, the kind of place you went when you wanted to impress someone. She had never mentioned wanting to stay here before, had never once suggested a trip for the two of us. But for whoever she was with, it was good enough. That thought fueled my determination as I crossed the street and walked into the lobby. I didn't go to the front desk. I didn't want to raise suspicion or give them a reason to call her room and warn her. Instead, I walked around, scanning the bar, the lounge, the pool area, looking for her. I wasn't even sure what I would do when I saw her, but I knew I needed to. It took less than 10 minutes to find her. She was sitting on a lounge chair by the pool, a drink in her hand, her head tilted back as she laughed at something. And next to her, lying back with a satisfied smile, was a man I had never seen before. He was younger, maybe early 30s, well-dressed, even in casual clothes, the kind of guy who looked like he never worried about money a day in his life. He leaned in toward her, saying something that made her giggle, and I felt a sharp, burning rage settle in my chest. I walked closer, staying just out of her line of sight. I wanted to hear them, wanted to know exactly how deep this went before I stepped in. "I can't believe you actually made it," the man said, swirling his drink in his glass. "I was sure you were going to back out last minute." She smirked, tilting her head to the side. "And missed this? You don't know me very well." He chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "I have to admit, I was skeptical when you said you were married. You don't act like a woman who's tied down." My fingers curled into fists. She sighed dramatically, stretching her arms above her head. "Well, let's just say my husband isn't exactly exciting anymore. I needed this. I needed something different." Every muscle in my body locked up as I stood there, listening to my wife talk about me like I was some boring obligation she was desperate to escape. I had spent years making sure she had everything she needed, making sure she never had to stress about bills or responsibilities outside of her job. And here she was, throwing it all away for some meaningless fling with a man who didn't even believe she was really married. I stepped forward, no longer caring about subtlety, no longer caring about giving her time to enjoy her little escape. She was mid-laugh when her eyes caught mine, and the color drained from her face so fast I thought she was going to pass out. The man next to her followed her gaze, frowning as he tried to piece together what was happening, but I wasn't looking at him. I was looking directly at her, waiting for her to say something, waiting for her to come up with whatever lie she thought could fix this. "Ethan." Her voice came out weak, barely above a whisper, as she sat up straighter, placing her drink on the table next to her, as if that would somehow make this moment less damning. "What are you doing here?" I ignored the question and turned my gaze toward the man next to her, my tone sharp and unwavering. "You must be the reason my wife forgot she was married." He blinked, glancing between the two of us before letting out a breath. "Oh no," he muttered under his breath. "You really are married." I took another step forward, watching as Olivia reached out like she wanted to grab my arm, but I stepped back before she could. "I don't know what you thought this was," I said, my voice steady despite the fury burning through me. "But whatever fantasy you were living in is over." She shook her head quickly, standing up now, looking around as if hoping someone would step in and save her from the situation she had created. "Ethan, don't," I interrupted, my voice low but firm. "Not here. Not in front of him." I motioned toward the man who was now sitting awkwardly, realizing he was part of something much bigger than he had signed up for. "If you want to explain yourself, you can do it in private. But don't expect me to believe a word of it." She swallowed, her hands trembling slightly, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing but cold, quiet anger. "Go to the room," I said, my voice like stone. "You have 5 minutes." She hesitated, but when she saw the look on my face, she grabbed her things and walked toward the hotel, her movement stiff and unnatural. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the lobby, knowing that this was only the beginning. When I finally turned my gaze back to the man, he raised his hand slightly, a forced, uneasy smile on his face. "Look, man, I didn't know." "I don't care," I cut him off. "She's your problem now." I turned and walked toward the hotel, not looking back, not slowing down. The confrontation wasn't over, not even close. She was about to learn what it felt like to have her world come crashing down, and I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. I walked through the hotel lobby with a calmness that felt unnatural, my steps steady, my breathing controlled, but inside, everything was sharp and burning. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in, pressing the button for her floor. The ride up was silent except for the occasional ding as it passed each level, but my mind wasn't quiet. I wasn't thinking about what I was going to say when I walked into that room. I wasn't thinking about how she would try to explain herself. I wasn't thinking about any excuses she would give me because nothing she said would matter. The door to her suite was already slightly open when I reached it, like she had been too shaken to close it properly behind her. I pushed it open and stepped inside, closing it fully before turning to see her standing in the middle of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, her mouth slightly open like she had 1,000 things to say but couldn't figure out where to start. She took a small step forward before hesitating. "Ethan, Sit down," I said, my voice steady but cold, not giving her any room to control this situation. She swallowed hard before moving to the couch, lowering herself onto the edge like she was afraid to get comfortable. I walked further into the suite, looking around at the space she had picked for her secret getaway. It was expensive, elegant, something meant for a celebration, and the thought of her lying in this bed with another man made my stomach tighten, but I pushed the feeling down because I needed to stay focused. I sat down in the chair across from her, elbows on my knees, fingers locked together, and finally looked her directly in the eyes. "You lied to me," I said, the words slow, deliberate. She shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan, let me explain." "Explain what?" I leaned forward slightly. "Explain why you told me you were in Chicago while you were here with him? Explain why you let me drive you to the airport, kiss you goodbye, while you already had this planned. Explain why you've been walking around laughing and drinking like you don't have a family waiting for you at home." Her eyes filled with something, guilt or regret, or maybe just fear of the consequences, but I didn't let it affect me. "I wasn't thinking," she said quietly. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "That's lie." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she knew better than to lie again, at least not yet. I kept my eyes on her, watching every little movement, every hesitation, waiting to see if there was any part of her that was going to admit the truth or if she was just going to keep trying to soften the reality of what she had done. "I didn't plan this the way you think," she finally said, her voice weak. "It wasn't supposed to be." "It wasn't supposed to be what?" I interrupted. "Real? Serious? It wasn't supposed to be something I found out about." She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "I don't love him." I let out a sharp breath, leaning back in my chair. "You think that matters to me?" Her fingers curled around the edge of the couch cushion, gripping it tightly. "It just happened," she whispered. "No," I corrected. "A mistake just happens. A lie this big takes effort." She flinched like the words had physically hit her, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to comfort her. I wasn't here to make this easier for her. I was here because she had spent months, maybe longer, betraying me, and I wasn't going to let her act like it was some accident. "I don't know what you want me to say," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "I want you to tell me how long you've been seeing him." She blinked, lips parting slightly before she looked away. "Ethan, does it?" "How long?" I cut her off. Her throat moved as she swallowed, hands tightening into fists against her lap. "A few months." I nodded slowly, letting that sink in. "And how many times have you been with him?" She stayed silent, like she was debating whether to answer or try to argue that it wasn't important, but the way her fingers trembled slightly gave her away. "Answer me," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she finally spoke. "A handful." I let out a breath, shaking my head, and stood up, pacing toward the window, looking out over the city that had become the setting of my humiliation. She watched me but didn't say anything, probably afraid of what I would do next. I turned back to her, nodding slowly. "So, that's it. You just wanted something new, something exciting? And now what? You were going to go back home, act like this never happened." Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice weak. I let out a humorless laugh. "That's the thing about betrayal, Olivia. It doesn't matter if you meant to hurt someone or not. You did it anyway." She dropped her head into her hands, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders shake slightly, but I wasn't going to let her guilt become my problem. She wasn't the one who had been lied to, who had been made to feel like a fool. That was me, and I wasn't going to let her shift the weight of this onto me. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice even. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Ethan." "There's nothing left to talk about," I continued. You can stay here. Enjoy the rest of your little vacation. When you get home, I won't be there. She stood up quickly, taking a step toward me. Please, just let me. I raised a hand, stopping her in place. No, Olivia. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Her face crumpled, but I turned away before I could see the full extent of it. I grabbed my bag, walked toward the door, and pulled it open without looking back. She didn't try to stop me, and I didn't hesitate to leave. The elevator ride down was silent, the same dull chime marking each floor, but the tension in my chest didn't ease even as I stepped into the lobby. I walked past the front desk, past the guests lounging in luxury, past the bar where Olivia had been laughing just an hour ago, and out through the front doors without looking back. The Miami heat hit me immediately, but it wasn't enough to distract me from the reality of what had just happened. I stood on the sidewalk, gripping my bag, breathing deeply to keep my thoughts from spiraling. She had nothing left to say, and I had nothing left to hear. I wasn't going to let her try to twist things, to find a way to make this seem like something that could be fixed. It couldn't. It wouldn't. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped on the one name I could trust right now. Ethan? My brother Ryan's voice came through after the second ring, the background noise telling me he was out somewhere, probably at a bar. What's up, man? Thought you were home with Lucas. I exhaled sharply, glancing up at the hotel behind me before speaking. I need a place to stay. There was a pause. You're in Miami? I'll explain when I get there, I said, adjusting my grip on my bag. Text me the address. Yeah, of course, he said, his voice shifting from confusion to something more serious. You good? I'll explain when I get there, I repeated, then hung up. I didn't want to explain anything over the phone. I didn't even want to think about it right now. I hailed a cab, gave the driver the address as soon as Ryan's text came through, and leaned back against the seat, staring out at the city that now felt like the last place I wanted to be. The ride was quiet except for the occasional honk of traffic, but my mind wasn't. Every detail, every moment of the last few hours played on repeat, each one cutting deeper than the last. Her laughter by the pool, the way she had looked at him, the way she had hesitated before admitting to everything. I clenched my jaw and shut my eyes for a second, forcing it all down. When the cab pulled up in front of Ryan's place, I handed the driver a few bills and stepped out, walking up the short path to his apartment. The door opened before I even knocked, and Ryan stood there, looking me up and down before stepping aside to let me in. He didn't ask anything right away, just grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, handed me one, and sat on the couch, waiting. I sat down across from him, twisting the cap off the bottle but not taking a sip just yet. All right, he finally said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. What is going on? I let out a breath, turning the bottle in my hands. Olivia's cheating on me. Ryan's expression didn't change right away, like he was waiting to hear the punchline, but when I didn't say anything else, his brows furrowed. What? She lied about going to a conference, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of it. She flew to Miami with some guy instead. Looked a sweet. Spent the whole day with him like she didn't have a husband and a kid at home. Ryan sat back, running a hand down his face. Jesus Christ. I finally took a sip of the beer, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue before speaking again. I confronted her, caught her by the pool with him. She tried to act surprised, like she didn't just spend months lying to me. What did she say? I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. She said it wasn't supposed to be serious. Said she didn't love him. Ryan scoffed. Like that makes it any better. It doesn't, I said, setting the bottle on the table. And I told her that. Ryan nodded slowly, exhaling. So what now? I told her I'm filing for divorce, I said without hesitation. I'm not giving her a chance to talk her way out of this. I don't care what she says, what she feels, what she regrets. She made her choice. Ryan studied me for a moment before nodding. Good. I glanced at my phone, the screen dark but still feeling like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't know if she would try to call, try to send some desperate message now that she had seen what it felt like to be caught, but I didn't care. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. I had spent over a decade trusting her, believing that we had something solid, something worth protecting. But I wasn't going to be the only one holding on to something that had already been broken. Ryan leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You need anything? You want me to make a call, get a lawyer lined up? I shook my head. I'll handle it when I get back. First thing. All right. He hesitated before speaking again. What about Lucas? The mention of my son made my chest tighten, but I pushed through it. I'll tell him when I get home. He deserves the truth. Ryan nodded again, his jaw tight. You staying here tonight? Yeah, I said, leaning back against the couch. Just for tonight. I'll head home in the morning. Ryan didn't push for more. He just nodded, stood up, and grabbed another beer from the fridge before tossing me the remote. Pick something. I'll be back in a minute. I caught the remote but didn't turn the TV on right away. I just sat there, staring at the dark screen, feeling the weight of everything settle in. This was the end of my marriage, the end of the life I had built with someone I thought I knew. But if she had been willing to throw it all away so easily, then maybe it had never been real in the first place. And I wasn't going to waste another second pretending that it was. The flight home was quiet, my phone still on airplane mode, not because I needed it to be, but because I didn't want to deal with whatever messages Olivia had sent while I was gone. I knew there would be something waiting, maybe an apology, maybe some desperate attempt to justify what she had done, maybe even a pathetic excuse about how I had never been supposed to find out, as if that changed anything. None of it mattered. I had already made my decision, and no amount of pleading or regret would make me question it. I wasn't going to be the man who let himself be disrespected and then begged for an explanation. I wasn't going to sit across from her at the kitchen table, listening to her cry about how it was a mistake, how she didn't want to lose our family, while knowing she had already made that choice the second she booked that flight to Miami. When I landed, I turned my phone back on and saw exactly what I expected: 7 missed calls, a handful of texts, all from her. I didn't open a single one. I walked through the airport, grabbed my bag from the carousel, and got in my car without hesitation, driving straight home like I hadn't just walked away from the woman I had spent over a decade with. My house looked the same as it did when I left, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't our home now. It was just mine, and it would stay that way. I set my bag down by the door and went straight to my office, grabbing the file with our financial documents. Olivia wasn't the only one who had time to prepare. I had spent the flight going through everything in my head, what needed to be done, what accounts needed to be separated, what legal steps I needed to take. I wasn't going to drag this out, wasn't going to give her a chance to twist things around and make this harder than it needed to be. The sooner this was over, the sooner I could move on. I sat down at my desk and called the lawyer I had researched before boarding the plane. This is David Harrison's office, a receptionist answered. I need to schedule a consultation, I said, keeping my tone firm. As soon as possible. Are you looking for representation in a divorce? Yes. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing on the other end. We have an opening tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll be there. I hung up before she could say anything else, leaning back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was happening. It was real. And I wasn't going to let myself second-guess it. I had just closed my eyes for a moment when I heard the front door open. Dad? Lucas's voice carried through the house, and I sat up immediately, my stomach tightening. I had been so focused on everything else that I hadn't thought about how I was going to tell him. In here, I called out, running a hand through my hair as I heard his footsteps approaching. He stepped into the office, dropping his backpack onto the floor before frowning at me. Where were you? Grandma picked me up from school yesterday. I nodded, rubbing my hands together, trying to find the right words. I had to go to Miami. His eyebrows pulled together in confusion. Miami? I gestured for him to sit, and he hesitated before dropping into the chair across from me. I didn't want to do this like some rehearsed speech, didn't want to soften the truth to make it easier. He deserved honesty, even if it hurt. I found out your mom lied about where she was going, I said, watching his face carefully. She told me she had a work conference, but she was actually in Miami with someone else. His expression didn't change right away, like he was trying to process what I had just said. Someone else? His voice was quieter now. I nodded. She was cheating on me. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists on his lap. You're sure? I went there myself, I said, keeping my tone even. I saw it. Lucas's throat moved as he swallowed, his eyes darting to the side like he was trying to hold himself together. So what happens now? I'm filing for divorce, I said without hesitation. I'm not going to stay in a marriage where I'm not respected. And I won't let her come back here and pretend nothing happened. His fingers twitched, his face pale. And me? You'll stay with me, I said immediately. You'll still see her, but you don't have to stay with her if you don't want to. That's your choice. Lucas stared at the floor for a long moment before nodding slowly. I don't want to stay with her. His voice was firm, but there was something in it that made my chest tighten. He wasn't just angry. He was hurt. And I hated that she had done this to him. I let out a slow breath, leaning forward. I know this isn't easy, and I wish I didn't have to tell you any of this. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here. We'll get through this. He nodded again, still staring at the floor, but after a moment, he looked up at me. Did she even try to explain? She tried, I admitted. But there's nothing she could say that would change what she did. Lucas's face hardened, and he nodded once before standing up. I don't want to see her right now. You don't have to, I said, standing up as well. You take as much time as you need. He picked up his backpack and turned toward the door. I'm going to go to my room. I watched him go, my hands tightening into fists as I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to have his family ripped apart because his mother couldn't stay loyal. But I wasn't going to let her actions ruin him. I was going to make sure he knew that he still had one parent who put him first. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I didn't have to look to know it was Olivia. I grabbed it, stared at the screen for a moment, then turned it off. She didn't deserve a response. She didn't deserve anything from me anymore. This was the end of our marriage, and I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she had lost.